Admiral Jessica Iron Hand Ramirez stood at the viewport of the INS Yorktown, watching the endless dance of debris that had once been Earth's proud defense fleet. Each glinting piece of metal caught the distant sunlight like a memorial spark to the thousands of lives lost in the Concordia's relentless advance. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the weight of humanity's last hope. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Chin's fingers flew across his tactical display. 17 Concordiate vessels holding position at the Mars exclusion zone. Their flagship, the Eternal Light, is conducting what appears to be some sort of victory ceremony. Ramirez's jaw tightened. She'd lost too many friends, too many good soldiers to these arrogant bastards who thought technological superiority meant they owned the galaxy. The Yorktown, their last capital ship, was considered obsolete by alien standards, a relic that had survived only because it had been undergoing refit when the invasion began. "Admiral," Communications Officer Diana Rodriguez called out. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies. It's a demand for surrender." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the aristocratic features of Supreme Commander Zixtal. His iridescent scales shimmered with self-satisfaction as he adjusted his ceremonial mantle. "People of Earth," his translator rendered his clicks and whistles into English, "your primitive resistance has been amusing, but ultimately futile. We have destroyed your fleet using but a fraction of our superior technology. Surrender now, and we will be merciful in our governance." Ramirez felt her blood boil, but 20 years of command experience kept her face impassive. Her hand unconsciously moved to the battle axe mounted beside her command chair, a Ramirez family heirloom that had seen combat from the Spanish Civil War to the Mars insurgency. Then she saw it. Behind Zixtal's shoulder, barely visible, hung the Concordia's ancient charter of combat. Her mind raced back to the xenohistory briefings she'd insisted her officers attend. The Concordiat, for all their advanced technology, still clung to traditions older than human civilization. "Open a channel," she ordered, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. "All frequencies, full broadcast. Channel open, Admiral." Ramirez stood, reaching for the battle axe. The ancient steel felt right in her hand, like generations of her ancestors were lending her their strength. "Supreme Commander Zixtal," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I see you display the ancient charter behind you. Are you familiar with Article 7, Paragraph 3? The alien commander's scales rippled with confusion. "Of course, but that has no bearing on." Ramirez raised the axe, letting the light catch its well-maintained edge. "Then you recognize this as a blessed weapon of war, carried through generations of my house. By the rights granted in Article 7, Paragraph 3, I challenge your flagship to single combat. Ship to ship, crew to crew, commander to commander." The bridge fell silent. Even the background hum of the Yorktown's nuclear engines seemed to quiet in anticipation. Zixtal's translator struggled to convey his spluttering shock. Behind him, his bridge crew erupted in frantic discussion, consulting data tablets and ancient texts. This is unprecedented," he finally managed. "You cannot possibly." "I can, and I have," Ramirez interrupted, her smile growing fiercer. "The charter makes no distinction between technological levels. It requires only that the challenging weapon be blessed by combat through generations. This axe has served in 6 wars across 2 centuries. Do you accept our challenge, or does the Concordiate Alliance forsake its most sacred laws?" The alien commander's scales had lost their luster, turning a sickly pale shade. His staff were practically rioting now, shoving digital readouts and historical documents at him. Finally, a different alien stepped into view, older, adorned with the markings of a legal overseer. "The challenge is valid," it pronounced slowly, as if the words caused physical pain. "By the ancient charter, you have the right to face our flagship in single combat." Ramirez hefted the axe in a casual salute. "Then we'll see you in the Kuiper Belt in 6 hours. Try not to keep us waiting." Some of us still use primitive nuclear propulsion, after all. The transmission cut off, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Did you just challenge an alien super dreadnought to a knife fight in space, ma'am? Lieutenant Commander Chen asked incredulously. Ramirez returned the axe to its mount, her eyes glinting with fierce determination. No, Marcus. I just taught them their first lesson about humanity. Never write a law you're not prepared to have used against you. She turned to her crew, her voice rising with authority. Now, let's go show these high-tech bastards what the last ship of Earth can do. Battle stations. Strip it all. Admiral Ramirez commanded, her voice echoing through the Yorktown's cavernous engineering bay. If it's not essential for combat, survival, or making the other guy die, I want it gone. Chief Engineer Kate O'Malley nodded grimly, directing her teams with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony of destruction. They were removing every non-essential system from the massive ship, replacing high-tech components with their more primitive counterparts. Ma'am, O'Malley called out, wiping grease from her hands, you should see what we found in storage. Original radar systems from the ship's first commissioning. Pure magnetron technology. No quantum entanglement, no probability fields. Just good old-fashioned radio waves bouncing off things. Ramirez's eyes lit up. Can you get it working? Already on it. The aliens won't even recognize it as sensor technology. To them, it'll look like background radiation. Throughout the ship, similar transformations were taking place. Lieutenant Commander Chen had his tactical team replacing their quantum-guided missiles with simple kinetic projectiles. The ship's sophisticated AI targeting systems were being supplemented with manual tracking stations that hadn't seen use in decades. We're going full analog, Chen asked, watching his state-of-the-art displays being augmented with physical plotting boards and grease pencils. You ever try to hack a pencil, Marcus? Ramirez replied with a wink. She turned serious. The Concordiat relies too heavily on technology. They've forgotten that warfare is about more than just having the biggest guns. The ship's internal communications crackled. Admiral, you need to see this. It was Rodriguez from Communications. The aliens are broadcasting again. The main screen lit up with Supreme Commander Zixtel's face. His scales had regained some of their luster, and his expression radiated smug confidence. Admiral Ramirez, he began, his translator struggling to convey his condescension. We have reviewed your vessel's specifications. In the spirit of our ancient laws, I offer you one final chance to withdraw your challenge. Your nuclear-powered vessel, with its primitive chemical thrusters and kinetic weapons, cannot hope to. Ramirez cut him off with a laugh that made her crew turn in surprise. Supreme Commander, do you know what my ancestors did before they took to space? They were shark hunters off the coast of Mexico. They learned pretty quick that the biggest predator in the ocean isn't always the one that survives. She gestured to O'Malley, who was already grinning. Show them our new paint job. The external cameras activated, revealing the Yorktown's bow. Where there had once been pristine military gray, now stretched a massive shark's mouth, complete with rows of serrated teeth. The ancient war paint of aerial combat had found new life in the void of space. What is the meaning of this primitive decoration? Zixtal demanded, his scales flickering in confusion. Just a little Earth history, Ramirez replied sweetly. Look it up in your databases under Flying Tigers if you're curious. We'll see you at the combat coordinates. After the transmission ended, Chen approached his commander. Ma'am, they're scanning us constantly. They'll notice we're stripping out our advanced systems. Counting on it, Marcus. Right now, their analysts are telling them we're making ourselves even more primitive. They'll never expect. She trailed off as O'Malley approached with a tablet. Speaking of surprises, you'll want to see this, Admiral. We've modified the ship's electromagnetic signature to match an old diesel-electric submarine. To their quantum sensors, we'll look like we're barely holding together. Ramirez studied the readouts, her smile growing wider. Perfect. Let them think we're desperate. Let them think we're reverting to primitive technology out of fear or ignorance." She looked around at her crew, pride evident in her expression. "But we know the truth. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when your enemy has forgotten they ever existed." She walked to the tactical station, where the newly installed plotting board waited. With deliberate ceremony, she picked up a grease pencil and drew a single line representing their course to the combat zone. "Now," she announced, "let's go hunting." The Kuiper Belt stretched before them, an endless sea of ice and rock. The humans had once considered the frontier of their solar system. Now it would become their hunting ground. "Launch the decoys," Ramirez ordered, her voice steady despite the tension rippling through the Yorktown's bridge. Lieutenant Commander Chen's fingers danced across his stripped-down tactical console. "Deploying Operation Ghost Fleet, I." From the Yorktown's cargo bays, hundreds of objects burst forth in a carefully choreographed dance. Each one was little more than an inflatable shell with a small reactor core and an old-style radio transmitter, but to alien sensors, they appeared as flickering, inconsistent shadows of ships. "The eternal light is powering up their weapons," Rodriguez reported from communications. They're broadcasting on all frequencies again." "Of course they are," Ramirez muttered. "They can't help themselves." "Put it on screen." Supreme Commander Zixtal's image appeared, his scales now glowing with combat bioluminescence. "Observe, primitive ones, the power of true technological advancement." The alien flagship's weapon ports opened like blooming flowers of death, each one radiating enough energy to vaporize a small moon. Quantum-entangled plasma streams lashed out, turning several of the decoys into expanding clouds of superheated gas. "Most impressive," Ramirez responded, her voice dripping with feigned awe. "Tell me, Supreme Commander, are you familiar with the human military theorist Sun Tzu? Your ancient writings are of no consequence in modern combat." Zixtal dismissed. Chen couldn't help but grin as he watched his tactical display. The alien flagship was charging its main weapon banks again, systematically targeting each decoy with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, the real Yorktown was slowly powering down, letting the stellar winds and gravitational eddies of the Kuiper Belt carry them into position. Sun Tzu said, "All warfare is based on deception," Ramirez continued, keeping the alien commander distracted. "He also said something about letting your enemy exhaust themselves." O'Malley's voice came through on a secure channel. "Admiral, their power emissions are off the charts. They're burning through energy like it's going out of style." "How's our signature looking, Chief?" To their sensors, "We look like a half-dead wreck running on fumes. The submarine mimicry is working perfectly." Another barrage of alien weapons fire destroyed a cluster of decoys. Zixtal's laughter filled the command channel. "Your pitiful fleet of false images cannot save you. We can detect the unique quantum signature of every vessel in known space." "Every modern vessel, you mean?" Ramirez corrected. She switched to internal comms. "Tactical, status of the real decoys." Chen's smile turned predatory. 5 authentic retired destroyers, remotely piloted, are in position behind the debris field. Their reactors are cold, but their torpedo tubes are loaded. And our friends still can't tell the difference between our inflatable balloons and actual ships. They're so focused on energy signatures, they've completely forgotten about basic mass detection. Ramirez nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Time to remind them that sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. Execute pattern Sierra 3. The Yorktown's primitive chemical thrusters fired in short, precise bursts, looking to alien sensors like the desperate maneuvers of a damaged ship. Meanwhile, the decoy destroyers began silently drifting into attack positions, masked by the radar-scattering properties of the belt's ice fragments. "Supreme Commander," Ramirez called out, letting a hint of desperation enter her voice. "Surely you can see the futility of prolonging this. Your superior technology has us completely outmatched." Zixtal's scales rippled with pleasure at the apparent submission. "Finally, you show wisdom. Prepare to be boarded and..." "Now," Ramirez's command was barely a whisper. Simultaneously, every decoy in the area began broadcasting different conflicting signals. Radar emissions bounced off ice fragments, creating ghost images. Radio signals from a century of human space exploration, carefully collected and rebroadcast, filled every frequency. In the chaos, 5 cold destroyers and 1 very alive Yorktown began their real approach. What is this primitive interference? Zixtal demanded, his image breaking up as his communication struggled with the barrage of old-school electronic warfare. This, Ramirez replied calmly. This is how we used to hunt submarines on Earth. Welcome to the ocean, Commander. Primary targeting array offline, Chen reported as the Yorktown shuddered from a glancing hit, switching to backup optical systems. Auxiliary power to forward shields is fluctuating, O'Malley added from engineering, rerouting through the redundant circuits. Admiral Ramirez gripped her command chair as another near-miss sent tremors through the hull. Status of the Eternal Light. They're still trying to shoot down every ghost signal we're broadcasting, Rodriguez replied, a hint of amusement in her voice despite the situation. Their targeting computers can't handle conflicting data feeds. She paused, listening to intercepted communications. They're actually rebooting their main combat eye. Perfect. Ramirez allowed herself a small smile. What was that old saying, Marcus? Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. Murphy's Law, Mom. Chen confirmed, his hands flying over the manual targeting controls. Something tells me the Concordia never had to deal with Murphy. The bridge lighting flickered and died, replaced immediately by the warm glow of chemical emergency lights. O'Malley's voice came through on backup communications. Main power grid took a hit, switching to secondary systems, and tertiary is standing by. How many backup systems did we install? Rodriguez asked incredulously. All of them, O'Malley replied with grim satisfaction. When the chief says redundancy, she means redundancy. Through the tactical display, they watched as the Eternal Light's sophisticated weapons continued to chase phantom targets. Each burst of energy weapons was more erratic than the last, their perfect targeting algorithms confused by the chaos of old-school electronic warfare. Admiral, Rodriguez suddenly called out. They're broadcasting again, but something's wrong. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Eternal Light's bridge in disarray. Supreme Commander Zixtal's scales were pale with stress as various crew members rushed around behind him, frantically trying to restore their systems. What have you done? He demanded. Our targeting systems are giving impossible readings. Our sensors detect thousands of ships, yet our mass detectors show nothing. Having technical difficulties, Ramirez asked innocently, have you tried turning it off and on again? This is impossible. Our systems are perfect. They cannot fail. And that, Ramirez replied, is exactly your problem. Chen, status of our cold-running destroyers. All 5 in firing position, Admiral. Just waiting for your word. Ramirez leaned forward in her chair. Supreme Commander, let me explain something about human engineering. We learned a long time ago that complex systems will always fail at the worst possible moment. So we plan for it. We expect it. We embrace it. As if to emphasize her point, another alarm blared through the Yorktown's bridge. Starboard maneuvering thrusters are down, O'Malley reported calmly. Switching to emergency compressed gas system. You see, Ramirez continued, when something breaks, we adapt. But your perfect technology, it doesn't know how to fail gracefully. You never learned the art of dealing with disaster. On screen, more alarms were sounding on the alien bridge. Our quantum targeting matrix is completely offline. One of Zixtal's officers reported, we cannot get a weapons lock. Use manual targeting. Zixtal commanded. What is manual targeting? The officer asked, genuinely confused. Ramirez's smile turned predatory. Allow me to demonstrate. All ships, execute pattern Delta. Show them how we did it in the 21st century. 5 supposedly dead destroyers suddenly powered up their ancient chemical engines. Their targeting systems weren't quantum entangled or AI-driven. They were simple optical scopes and basic radar, operated by veteran crews who knew how to shoot without computer assistance. Impossible, Zixtal shouted as his sensors finally detected the real threat. Those vessels were dead. Playing dead, Ramirez corrected. Another old human trick. Fire when ready. The space around the eternal light erupted with the light of chemical-propelled torpedoes and kinetic projectiles. Simple weapons that needed no sophisticated guidance systems to find their target. As his perfect ship began taking real damage for the first time, Supreme Commander Zixtal finally understood the human phrase that Ramirez had transmitted at the start of battle. The more they overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop up the drain. Quantum shields at maximum power. Zixtal's voice boomed across all frequencies. Your primitive kinetic weapons cannot hope to penetrate our defenses. The eternal light glowed with ethereal energy, a testament to technological advancement that could bend the laws of physics themselves. Or so they thought. Chief O'Malley, Ramirez called out, is Project Crowbar ready? Armed and eager, Admiral. O'Malley's voice carried the hint of someone about to share a particularly good joke. All 18,000 tungsten rods are prepped for launch. Mass drivers are charged and ready. Ramirez opened a channel to the alien flagship. Supreme Commander, would you like a physics lesson? Your primitive understanding of physics is irrelevant. Zixtal scoffed. Our quantum shields operate on principles your species can barely comprehend. Oh, I comprehend just fine, Ramirez replied, nodding to Chen. You see, Sir Isaac Newton figured out everything we need to know about this particular problem back in the 17th century. Lieutenant Commander, would you care to demonstrate? Chen's fingers flew across his console. Project Crowbar launching in 3, 2, 1. The Yorktown's cargo bays opened like blooming flowers of death, but instead of missiles or energy weapons, they released what appeared to be simple metal rods. Thousands of them, each barely larger than a telephone pole, accelerated rapidly by electromagnetic mass drivers. Are these construction materials? Zixtal's translator struggled to convey his mixture of confusion and contempt. Not exactly, Ramirez said, her voice taking on a teacher's patient tone. You see, there's this old equation. Force equals mass times acceleration. Right now, those construction materials are accelerating to about 30% of light speed. The first wave of tungsten rods approached the eternal light's quantum shields. The aliens didn't even bother to evade, their confidence in their defensive technology absolute. That confidence lasted exactly 2.3 seconds. The rods struck the quantum shields like artillery shells hitting tissue paper. The shields, designed to dissipate energy weapons and deflect conventional explosives, had no answer for simple objects moving at relativistic speeds. Physics, as it turned out, couldn't be negotiated with. Impossible. Zixtal shrieked as the first impacts registered. Our shields are rated for energy weapons? Ramirez interrupted. For explosions? For all sorts of sophisticated attacks. But did anyone ever test them against good old-fashioned kinetic impact? She paused for effect. You know, Newton's first law. An object in motion tends to stay in motion, especially when that object is dense tungsten moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The eternal light's perfect hull began sprouting holes as rod after rod punched through their defenses. Each impact transmitted enough kinetic energy to vaporize metal, creating brief, brilliant explosions where they struck. Status report, Zixtal demanded of his crew. Shields are holding. Supreme Commander, one of his officers replied, confused. But the projectiles are simply passing through them. Of course they are, Ramirez commented. Your shields stop energy. These aren't energy weapons. They're just very fast rocks. The same principle ancient humans used with slings and arrows, just scaled up a bit. O'Malley's voice came through on the tactical channel. Second wave, ready. Admiral, these ones are spinning. Spinning? Chen asked. Gyroscopic stabilization. O'Malley explained cheerfully. Makes them drill through the target instead of just punching through. Old oil drilling technique, actually. Ramirez couldn't help but smile. Launch the second wave. And someone please explain to our alien friends why we humans never stopped studying primitive physics. The space between the ships filled with thousands more tungsten rods, their polished surfaces catching sunlight as they accelerated to lethal velocity. To the alien sensors, they'd barely registered. Just simple masses of metal, hardly worth noticing compared to sophisticated modern weapons. Those same sensors then watched in horror as the simple masses of metal tore through their advanced warship like a hot knife through butter. Here's another physics lesson, Ramirez broadcasted as the Eternal Light's hull began to break apart. You can't cheat momentum. You can't negotiate with inertia. And you definitely can't shield against Sir Isaac Newton. Direct hit on Deck 3. Rodriguez shouted over the blare of damage alarms. Hull breach in sections 17 through 20. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the Yorktown as damage control teams rushed to their stations. The ship groaned like a wounded animal as both vessels, now heavily damaged, circled each other in a deadly dance. Damage report. Ramirez commanded, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. A previous impact had thrown her against the tactical station, but she'd refused to sit down. Port side mast drivers are offline, Chen reported. Auxiliary power is at 40%. We've lost our forward sensor array and we've got fires in engineering. O'Malley's voice cut through the chaos, breaking out the chemical suppressants, the old-fashioned kind. Through the main viewport, they could see the Eternal Light wasn't faring much better. Their once pristine hull was riddled with holes from Project Crowbar, atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. Their perfect quantum technology sparked and failed across their surface. Your primitive vessel is falling apart. Zixtal's voice crackled through damaged speakers. Surrender now and engineering to bridge. O'Malley interrupted. You're gonna want to hear this, Admiral. Go ahead, Chief. The sound of singing filled the command channel. Deep voices, dozens of them, rising above the hiss of fire suppressants and the crack of emergency repairs. Buddy, you're a boy. Make a big noise. Playing in the street. What is this barbaric noise? Zixtal demanded. That, Ramirez replied with fierce pride, is my damage control team putting my ship back together. With duct tape, with welding torches, with whatever they can find. And they're doing it while singing Queen. The singing grew louder as more crews joined in. We while rocky you. Status of the hull breach. Ramirez asked over the impromptu chorus. Sealed it with emergency patches and prayer, ma'am, O'Malley reported. It ain't pretty, but it'll hold vacuum. Unlike some people, we know how to keep fighting with battle damage. On screen, they could see the Eternal Light's crew struggling with their own damage. Their perfect systems, designed to function flawlessly or not at all, were failing one by one. They had no backup plans, no emergency patches, no centuries of experience dealing with disaster. Their quantum core is destabilizing, Chen reported with satisfaction. They never designed it to run damage. They're having to shut down systems just to prevent a cascade failure. Send them the next verse, Ramirez ordered with a predatory smile. The Yorktown's external speakers, originally designed for emergency broadcasts, began blasting, "We will rock you" at full volume. The sound didn't carry in space, but the electromagnetic waves of the transmission crashed against the alien ship's sensors like a tidal wave. Stop this primitive audio assault, Zixtal demanded, his scales shifting to stress patterns. This is not proper combat protocol. You're right, Ramirez agreed. This is psychological warfare. Something else you forgot about while developing your perfect technology. She turned to her crew. All hands, battle stations. Show them how we fight dirty. The Yorktown's remaining engines flared to life. She wasn't pristine anymore. Her hull was patched with emergency sealant, her systems jury-rigged with manual bypasses, her crew bleeding but unbowed. But she moved with purpose, with the determination of a species that had learned to fight through pain and fear and damage. "Target their starboard weapon banks," Ramirez ordered. "Let's see how their perfect quantum targeting system handles a ship held together with duct tape and spite." The Yorktown charged forward, her damaged hull creaking with the strain. But where the alien crew saw a crippled vessel making a suicidal run, Ramirez saw something else. She saw the indomitable human spirit, expressed in emergency wells and manual overrides and defiant songs in the face of death. "You know the difference between us," she broadcast to the eternal light. "We learned to fight bleeding. You never had to bleed at all. Time to fix that oversight in your education." Reality distortion field detected. Chen's warning cut through the chaos of battle. They're deploying their super weapon. Space itself seemed to twist around the eternal light as it activated its ultimate defense system. The quantum field warped the fabric of space-time, creating a bubble where the laws of physics themselves became suggestions rather than rules. "So this is it," Ramirez muttered, watching the sensor readings go haywire. "Their trump card." She keyed the internal comm. "Chief O'Malley, please tell me we have something left to throw at them." "Oh, we've got something all right." O'Malley's voice carried a mix of exhaustion and manic glee. "Remember all those weapon systems we stripped out? We didn't exactly throw them away." Understanding dawned on Ramirez's face. "You mean every missile, torpedo, and projectile we removed is sitting in Cargo Bay 3, rigged for simultaneous launch. It ain't pretty, but it'll work. Once. Their reality distortion field will tear apart anything sophisticated we throw at it," Chen warned, studying his tactical display. Ramirez's smile turned wolfish. "Then let's not be sophisticated. All hands, brace for maximum recoil. Engineering, prepare for simultaneous launch of all remaining ordnance." "All of it?" Rodriguez asked, eyes widening. "But that's everything we've got," Ramirez confirmed. "Every missile, every torpedo, every chunk of metal we can throw. Sometimes quantity has a quality all its own." The eternal light's reality distortion field expanded, its quantum mechanics defying normal space. Zixtal's image appeared on their screen, his scales glowing with triumph despite his ship's damage. "Behold true power," he declared. "Our quantum field can disassemble any weapon at the subatomic level. Your primitive attacks are useless now." "Funny thing about primitive attacks," Ramirez replied calmly. "They tend to be really simple. Really straightforward. Chief, open the cargo bay doors." The Yorktown's massive cargo bay doors slid open, revealing what looked like a junkyard's worth of weapons. Missiles of every size lay alongside torpedoes, railgun slugs, and even the remaining tungsten rods from Project Crowbar. "What is this?" Zixtal demanded. "Your weapons cannot penetrate our quantum field. Our calculations show." "That's your problem right there," Ramirez interrupted. "You're still calculating. We're just going to throw everything we have and see what sticks. Fire everything." The Yorktown shuddered as hundreds of weapons launched simultaneously. The recoil sent the ship spinning, its damaged stabilizers struggling to compensate. Every missile, every torpedo, every piece of ammunition they had left streaked toward the eternal light's reality distortion field. "Their field is targeting our guidance systems," Chen reported. "Good thing none of those weapons are guided anymore," O'Malley cut in. "They're just rocks we strapped engines to. Point and shoot, the old-fashioned way." The quantum field, designed to counter sophisticated modern weapons, encountered something it had never been programmed to handle: pure, unrelenting volume of fire. For every projectile it stopped, 3 more slipped through. For every missile it disassembled, 5 more struck home. Impossible. Zixtal's scales had gone completely pale. "Our field should be perfect. It should stop everything." Shoot is a funny word in combat, Ramirez observed as the barrage continued. Murphy's Law trumps should every time. And speaking of laws, she watched as the sheer volume of impacts began overwhelming the alien defenses. Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. All that force has to go somewhere. The reality distortion field began to collapse under the strain, its perfect quantum calculations unable to handle the chaos of hundreds of simultaneous impacts. The Eternal Light's hull, already weakened from previous damage, started breaking apart under the assault. "Your weapons are primitive," Zixtal shouted in desperation. "They shouldn't be able to." "Primitive." Ramirez cut him off. "No. Classic. Tested. Proven. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. And right now, the old way is to keep shooting until the target stops being a target. Power to all remaining weapons. Let's finish this the way humanity has finished fights since we first picked up rocks, with overwhelming force." The Eternal Light drifted powerless in space, its once perfect hull now a testament to the effectiveness of primitive warfare. Emergency beacons flickered weakly across its surface, their sophisticated quantum signatures reduced to simple distress calls. "Status of the alien flagship?" Ramirez asked, her voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. "Their quantum core is offline," Chen reported with satisfaction. "Main power systems are dead. They're running on emergency power only." He paused, checking another reading. "And they're broadcasting a surrender signal. On every frequency, including some I'm pretty sure humans invented." "Open a channel," Ramirez ordered, straightening in her chair despite her exhaustion. The main screen flickered to life, showing the Eternal Light's bridge. Gone was the pristine order of before. Emergency lighting cast shadows across hastily applied patch seals and manually operated backup systems. Supreme Commander Zixtal stood at attention, his scales a muted gray of defeat. "Admiral Ramirez," he began formally, "the Eternal Light surrenders. We request assistance with damage control." "Having trouble with emergency repairs?" Ramirez asked, unable to keep a hint of smugness from her voice. "We." Zixtal seemed to deflate slightly. "We have no protocols for operating damaged systems. Our technology was designed to function perfectly or not at all. We need," he visibly struggled with the words, "we need your primitive expertise." Ramirez nodded to O'Malley, who was already gathering her damage control teams. "We'll send over assistance. But first, I think it's time for that history lesson I promised you." The Admiral stood, retrieving her family's battle axe from its mount. "You see this weapon? It's not just a ceremonial tool I use to invoke your combat laws. This axe has seen combat in 6 wars across 2 centuries. Each nick and scratch tells a story of human conflict, of lessons learned in blood and fire." She ran her finger along the axe's edge as she continued. "Every tactic we use today was developed centuries ago. The electronic warfare, submarine tactics from the Cold War, the decoys, tricks we learned fighting in the Pacific, the damage control procedures, techniques perfected by sailors who had to keep fighting with burning ships. But your technology is so primitive," one of Zixtal's officers protested. "No," Ramirez corrected. "Our technology is tested. Everything we use today worked because someone somewhere paid for that knowledge in blood. We didn't deploy a single tactic that hadn't been proven in actual combat." Understanding began to dawn in Zixtal's eyes. "Your species, you keep these old ways alive deliberately." "Of course we do." Ramirez gestured to her battered but functioning ship. "Perfect systems fail perfectly. Imperfect systems. We learn to work with those, to adapt, to overcome. That's the real lesson here. Not that humanity is stronger or smarter, but that we remember our history. We learn from it." The alien commander was quiet for a long moment. "The Concordiate, we would request something unprecedented," he finally said. "We wish to send our officers to study at your military academies. To learn these historical lessons, Ramirez smiled. I think that can be arranged. First lesson starts now. Chief O'Malley will show your crew how to properly patch a hull breach with nothing but spare parts and determination. As damage control teams transferred between the ships, Rodriguez called out from her station. Admiral, the Concordiate fleet is sending peace signals. They're requesting copies of human military history texts. Send them everything, Ramirez ordered, from Sun Tzu to the latest Naval Academy textbooks. It's time they learned that warfare isn't about having the best technology. It's about having the wisdom to use what you have effectively. She turned back to Sixtel's image. One more thing. Supreme Commander, that battle axe you seemed so dismissive of, it's going in your military museum. Label it the most primitive weapon that ever won a space war. Let it remind future generations that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The alien commander bowed his head in acknowledgement. The lesson, he admitted, has been well learned, Professor. Ramirez grinned. Class dismissed.